Hey, deserving listeners, this is Chapter 2 in our deep dive on Sean Diddy Combs. In this episode, we're going to begin with the chronological history of his life to comb through some of the relevant details that might explain his behavior, or at least how the pattern of his behavior looked. Let's get into it. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, so let's get into the history that I could glean from the internet anyway on Sean Combs' childhood first. He was born in 1969. His name is Sean John Combs. We talked about that last time. He was born in Harlem, New York City. His father, do you know anything about his father?
No.
This is interesting. So his father, Melvin Combs, was a known drug dealer. That's not speculation or rumor. He has been confirmed as a drug dealer of heroin in the 1970s, maybe in the 60s as well. He worked under Frank Lucas. Do you know who Frank Lucas was?
No.
So Frank Lucas was notorious for being one of the main heroin dealers in New York City in the 1970s.
Whoa. So this was a connected individual.
And
yikes.
Denzel Washington portrays Frank Lucas.
Oh.
Have you seen American Gangster?
No, but I know the movie. I know of the movie. That's that character?
Yeah. So Denzel Washington plays Frank Lucas. Frank Lucas was Melvin Combs' boss.
So is there a Melvin Combs in the movie, I wonder?
I don't think so.
Okay. So he grew up in a safe, healthy, normal environment.
And his father was murdered at the age of 33 when Sean was just 2 years old. He was shot to death while sitting in his car in Manhattan, reportedly due to his involvement in drug trafficking.
Okay, so he's got no father from the age of 2.
Right. And the traumatic exit of his father from his life, right? What that could do. What do you, just, speculation, what could that do to someone? He's 2 years old, so he might not remember it, but what could that do to his attachment? And as he ages and reflects back on this event, this loss, what do you think it could do to someone's psychology?
Well, man, there's several ways to go with this. First of all, we don't know, unless you have some account of it, what his relationship at 2 was with his father. If the father was loving, if he was involved or not. In either case, whether he was or wasn't, he exited at 2, meaning he lost a father, so he's definitely going to have issues from just that aspect.
Right. Let me just put an asterisk on that, in that, of course, rationally, we wouldn't see it as an abandonment, right?
Right.
Because it wasn't his choice to die. But it can very much be felt by children in situations like this to be an abandonment.
Right.
Because they aren't old enough to understand that it is not volitional on the father's part, right? So it's not uncommon for young children, even children, 5, 10 years old, to personalize it in an irrational manner of just like, well, if I was a better kid, he'd still be around.
And it's quite possible that as he grew older and maybe he did learn what actually happened at some point.
Right.
He might have actually then blamed them consciously. Because you could think,
right,
that's
like, why did you get involved in that?
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that would have just only
if you loved me more, you would have had a safer job.
Yeah. So that's a good point. There's potential feelings of, I'm not good enough for a father.
Right.
A. Second, even if I'm imagining that at 2, they didn't sit him down and told him, your father was shot in a car with this kind of gun and stuff. But it's possible that there was violence around, let alone if the father was violent in the home, but like there's violence around. So an unstable world is what we're being born into, one in which maybe we are the only person we can depend on, or it's very, very small little bits that we can depend on. So
yeah, there's just a lot of speculation. I couldn't find any accounts or reports. Sean Combs is not the sort, from my understanding, to get into the vulnerability of his childhood. So I don't know. All I know is these broad facts, that his father was killed when Sean was 2. We can only speculate it. Another speculation is the identification. It's not uncommon that when we have a death of someone close to us, that as a fantasy of retaining or gaining that person back, is to become like them, right? So there's a chance that he always identified with his father and knew some of the details and was striving to become like him in a way, to, in a psychological way, gain him back or gain his approval even, right? Even though rationally you wouldn't be thinking of it that way.
So become a gangster, even if then not technically selling heroin, assuming you didn't sell heroin, but a gangster nonetheless.
Right. Also, depending on what he did learn or what he imagines his father was like, it could give him permission or influence on his sense of morality, right? His sense of what is okay and what's not okay. Again, I don't know. Maybe the father was a great dad, and maybe he was a moral, ethical drug dealer. I mean, those people do exist. We can't know. But there's a wide range of possibilities here. As you said, he could have been a problem at home, the father. The mother could have been very stressed out, even when the father was alive. After the father is killed, that's got to be pretty stressful. That's going to impact your parenting potentially if you're the mom. It's just a lot of speculation. So that's one of the details that I found out, and I thought I should be mentioned. His mother, Janice Combs, maiden name Smalls, by the way.
Oh.
Which is interesting.
Interesting.
She was a model and a teacher's assistant, and she reportedly emphasized a lot of ambition goals for Sean. So that's another major influence. His mom was a major influence on his life. She worked really hard to provide for Sean and his sibling Keisha. So Sean has a sister, Keisha. They were raised Catholic. Sean served as an altar boy, which I'm sure for some will raise the question, well, what question does it raise?
He was abused.
Right.
I mean, in my mind, if the allegations are true, if 10% of the allegations are true, unless he's just like this one-off random sadistic psychopath that came out of nowhere, I'm guessing he was abused. And if he was an altar boy, there's good odds that he was abused in that system too.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the rate of altar boys that are sexually abused. I think some research indicates that the incidence, the rate of children being raped is the same rate that you would see in other arenas, like at school or something. But the fact that the Catholic Church covered it up so egregiously and aggressively for so many years highlights the fact that it did happen.
Yeah.
And it gives the false impression that everyone was being raped in these Catholic institutions, which apparently is an exaggeration. So it's a bit of an exaggeration to just assume that it did happen to him, but it does raise a question, is the thing. And it does raise the question as to how did Sean Combs develop a severe case of sexual sadism, which we'll get into at the end of this deep dive in terms of discussing the diagnoses that could be at play. We can't know for sure, obviously, but sexual sadism is a thing. Sadism is a thing, and also psychopathy, antisocial, what the internet will say, a sociopath, or what the internet will also call a narcissist, which I'll get into as well with him. And some went wrong in all likelihood. The other thing to wonder about is if the father suffered from psychopathy himself. That can be a factor in the development of psychopathy, is having a psychopathic parent or family member. Because you can have sexual sadism and not be a psychopath, but if you're both a sexual sadist and a psychopath, then you're much more likely to harm people.
Do you know who Kendrick Lamar is?
Yeah.
He has a song where he discusses, I think it's called Mother or something, where he discusses this kind of cycle of abuse.
Well, didn't you and I review this
I think we
song?
talked, yeah, that sounds familiar.
The fans wanted us to talk about it.
That's right. And it's, I think it's a real problem that is under discussed in some communities throughout the world. And it seems like potentially Black American communities, there might be a pervasive issue with sexual abuse, patterns of sexual abuse that pass from generation to generation. So it's quite possible that whether it was a church or not, that he was he suffered from that as well.
Right. So there's not much data beyond that. So everything's just speculative. It's possible that everything went well for him, but we just have to imagine something went wrong there. In the 80s, he's a teenager. Sean was known for his entrepreneurial spirit and his hustler mentality, even as a teenager. And he acquired the nickname Puff at the time. Do you know where he got that nickname?
I've heard multiple accounts. The most ridiculous one I've heard is that he would like puff himself up because he would get very irritated or something.
What's
like
the
that.
other accounts that you've heard?
Well, I've certainly heard that it was puffing pot.
Right. Yeah, that's what we all assumed, right?
Yeah, but apparently, I mean, like one of the accounts that seems more almost believable because it's even more trivially is that when he was young, he'd get angry easily and he'd like puff up or something. So they call him Puff Daddy as a joke or something.
Right.
Who knows?
Well, not Puff Daddy. They just called him Puff.
Puff, yeah, Puff.
So that's the prevailing story, is that he was given the name Puff by his friends or classmates because when he would get angry, he would huff and puff.
Yeah. Oh, huff and puff. Yeah.
And people would make fun of him. It was a joke. It was like, oh, here comes Puff. Right.
But I certainly imagined all my life, I imagined it was related to pot.
Right. So he, in high school, went to Mount St. Michael Academy, which is an all-boys Catholic school. He played football. Sean was known for organizing parties and other events, which he would continue to do later in life. He graduated in 1987, which to me means that he graduated early. So he graduates from high school and he goes to college. He goes to Howard University in Washington, D.C., which is a historically black college. He studied business, but he left after 2 years before he graduated to pursue opportunities in the music industry. He'd always wanted to work in the music industry. So that ends that chapter of his life. And let's take a break. When we get back, let's continue with the chronology. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, back from the break. So that brings us to 1990. He has left college after a couple years, and he intended to work in the music industry. So he approached Uptown Records and became an intern. And he quickly rose in the ranks to an executive PR position, someone that works with artists and finds artists, discovers artists, and grooms them for success. He helped develop Mary J. Blige at this time and also Jodeci. So he was a very quick learner and very ambitious, and apparently good enough at what he was doing to actually be successful and rise in the ranks. You know, not every intern gets hired, for example. So there's that. Have you heard what his behavior was like with coworkers?
Yeah, I heard that people tended to not like him because they thought he was a jerk and that he was haughty, and maybe he was already acting the part he wanted to have, which was being in charge of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a good description of what I've read. He was also verbally abusive to people who would call people names, particularly women, at work. It sounded, on some accounts, it just sounds like a very ambitious, annoying coworker that's just really gung-ho about working. But there are other accounts where it just seems like he was trying to hurt other people verbally for no reason, putting other people down. It's
just that this was early 90s, and as horrible as it is, actually, it's interesting that it would stand out to some people because that was the environment.
There was one interview with one woman that said that she actually quit working at Uptown Records because of him, because of the way he treated people.
Wow.
So it's not just like, oh, another annoying, haughty, arrogant dude at work.
Right.
It's like, no, this is way beyond.
Right.
And I want to quit now.
That's what's interesting to remark on, because again, even well into the 2000s, it was not uncommon for very toxic work environments and portrayed in media, like the Entourage series, for example, like high profile, high power individuals in the entertainment industry have to yell and cuss and insult people's sexuality and race all the time, right? So yet, even within that ecosystem, he apparently stood out as being too much.
Right. And this is important because it's one of the first, aside from the huffing and puffing, which is interesting, right, to see a consistency around abusive behavior and potentially sadistic behavior. You know, it's one thing to have an anger management problem. It's another thing to seek out harm of other people, because that's literally why you wake up in the morning, is to see other people harm, particularly you being the one that causes the harm. So there's that. Also, potential sensitivity to being made to feel inferior, which we'll get into later when we talk about narcissism. But anyway, so in 1990, this is the year that he renamed himself to Puff Daddy.
Okay.
We heard potentially where Puff came from. Where do you think Daddy comes from?
It's in the hip hop realm. It's who's your daddy? He's in charge. A daddy is usually a paternal figure in charge of things. So he's Puff Daddy. He's at the top of some hierarchy.
Right. It's important to know he's 21 years old at this point.
Right.
But yeah, that's the implication, you know, like Big Daddy Kane, this kind of stuff. And for younger people today, they have a different meaning for daddy. Do you know how people use daddy today?
As someone's father who one respects a lot?
On the internet anyway, at least for a time, I would say 5 years ago, it was primarily being used as a sexual thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, daddy. Okay.
Yeah. Or zaddy was another variation of it.
I'm uncomfortable with it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I'm uncomfortable using the term daddy in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to, because, you know, calling people daddy or wanting to be called daddy or whatever has been a thing for at least my whole life anyway, maybe beyond. It's another thing when it gets used so much in culture that it ruins the original name.
Yeah.
You know, there's plenty of kids that call their dad daddy.
Yeah.
But if you say that in certain internet circles, they'll say that's disgusting.
I know. See, that's why I'm saying before.
I mean, do your girls call you daddy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want any.
And I want to retain that.
I know.
I don't want, you know, I'm all for people, you know, I'm not going to yuck any yums. And plus, maybe it's one of my yums. Just joking.
Do you think there's a ton of daddy issues out there and that leads
I'm just saying, you know, go for it.
Yeah.
But don't redefine the term and ruin it for kids and families that are using the word, you know, daddy or mommy or something. Anyway, so Puff Daddy, 21 years old, he names himself Puff Daddy. Now, I highlight, because I'm going to highlight all of his name changes as a interest of the storyline, but also it says something about him, right?
Yeah.
What do you think it says about him, potentially, given what we know about him before and after, to name him? He declares, you know, he could have just called himself Sean Combs. He's not a rapper at this point. Right. He's an exec.
And by the way, Sean Combs, maybe I'm biased, but that sounds like a cool name, right?
Yeah, or Sean John or something.
Sean John for sure, but Sean Combs itself is like, oh, that's cool. Anyways, so it could be lacking or wanting to find one's identity, like feeling like one's identity is not right, feeling like you don't know who you are, perhaps, or wanting to change your past. You know, like, okay, I'm done with that. That's that thing that I hate. I am now this.
Yeah, maybe a claim over the word puff, right? That it was used originally to make fun of him, and so now he's leaning into it of, yeah, that's fine. That is my name, and yeah, I do huff and puff when I get angry. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I huff and puff. And then the daddy part of wanting to be superior. The way that he presented himself was particular.
Yeah.
And it always bothered me, the way that he presented himself in interviews. He never came across as authentic, which, you know, whatever, you're a public figure, but he just seemed so uptight and so determined to come across like the way that he wanted to come across, which is to come across like some kind of
a mogul.
Yeah. He had an image of what the stereotype of a mogul was like, and he desperately tried to portray himself that way, but it always seemed like a massive put on, right?
It's interesting. You know, I fell for it. When I was young and I would see him, I wasn't like a big fan or something, but whenever I'd see him in an interview or that show that we talked about or on videos, I fell for it. I was like, oh, that guy knows what's up. Look at him dressed. Look how he talks.
Like his equivalent is Suge Knight, right?
Yeah.
Suge Knight wanted to come across as a former gang member, but kind of a gangster, right?
Yeah.
He didn't have to act.
He did not have to act.
The guy was that,
Yeah.
embodied that.
Yeah.
He was authentic.
Yeah.
Sean Combs always came across as fake to me.
In fact, if anything, when you see Suge Knight interviews, he actually is trying to tone it down a bit,
Right.
because he can be so intimidating, and he gets a bad rap as a result.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the guy is horrible, but I'm saying
Yeah.
on top of that, like if he was acting his normal behind closed doors persona on interviews, dude, that would
Yeah.
not help him at all.
Right. People would be terrified.
Yeah.
So I think his effort here, I think, is one tick in the column of a desperation, a defense, a need.
Interesting.
And then you also think about the fact that his dad was killed when
Yeah.
he was doing this word "dad" in his name. Who knows?
Yeah.
Just a thing. All right, going out with the history. So 1991 goes by, 1992 goes by. He's still working at Uptown Records. He's, working his way up the ranks, working with Jodeci, Mary J. Blige. He's getting closer to the owner of Uptown Records. And then in 1993, he is fired from Uptown Records. This is after 3 years, because he was fighting with the CEO, Andre Harrell, about many things. There's a lot of reports, but he had been fighting with the CEO of Uptown Records on how to manage the artists, how much to spend on things. I think from the reporting, Sean Combs wanted to spend a lot of money from the coffers of Uptown Records to throw lavish parties and promotional events to raise the profile of some of the artists, right? And the CEO was like, "No, we don't want to spend that much money, so calm down." And they would get into fights.
This was not an unusual happening, I think, in media industries where the older guard, the newer guard would come up and they're like, they don't know what they're doing. And then when they would get a little too much rope, they were overspend. There was a infamous story at Microsoft during. Do you know what DirectX was?
Yeah, DirectX is still on Windows.
Yeah, exactly. So before DirectX, all games, all graphics on Windows was done via this thing called WinG, or done in DOS. And it was really clunky, really hard to do all these things. Okay, and also slow. These guys got together like, oh, we need something faster. And they made this thing called DirectX, which actually let you access the hardware more directly. Made it faster, made it better. All right. Well, they needed to promote this and get developers excited to develop on it. So this one evangelist, Alex St. John, was like, oh, I got it. And again, young up-and-comer, old guard wouldn't have done this. He threw a $1 million, which by today's standards, back then, this was ridiculous from what I hear. $1 million
of his own
event.
money?
No, company money.
Oh, okay.
He just grabbed the credit card, whatever, Amex, whatever. $1 million event to promote this thing. And he came apparently this close to getting fired. The story goes that Bill Gates decided to not let him go because he was really good for the brand or whatever. But the point is, similar kind of disagreement, apparently yelling match over emails, all these things.
Yeah. And maybe these are the rare examples where the young up-and-comer is right? Because DirectX was the shit and maybe deserved a big party and would benefit Microsoft by promotion and investment. And also, Sean Combs did know what he was doing in the music industry, and the CEO should maybe have accommodated him if he wanted Sean Combs to stay with Uptown Records. I don't know that for sure, but I'm guessing there are countless other stories where a young up-and-comer wants to spend a lot of money and is not successful in the end, and it's right that the CEO is clamping down. So who knows? But so he's fired, which is interesting, is a data point, and he immediately launches Bad Boy Entertainment, which is backed by Arista Records. So he started something on his own, but he also had connections with Arista Records, which is a really big deal. He probably wouldn't have been successful without that connection. So I'm also going to detail, as we go through the chronology, the reported romantic partners that he was involved with, because sometimes it's critical that we actually understand what was going on. So at the time, reportedly, he had a girlfriend named Misa Hilton. She's a stylist and a creative director. They had a son, his first child, and her first child, Justin, born 1993. More on him later, by the way. So that brings us to 1994, where Biggie enters the picture. So we will get into that whole story, which is pretty interesting, and it illuminates a bit of Sean Combs' personality. But the rest of this episode will just be for patrons of the podcast. So if you want to hear the rest of this chapter, then become a patron on Patreon. Otherwise, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.